Welcome, I'm Kevin Osland, your host. The 2012 Minnesota Legislature will discuss important issues affecting sportsmen, the first of which is funding for the state's walk-in access program. Minnesota's first walk-in access began in the fall of 2011 and was modeled after successful programs in North and South Dakota. Minnesota's enrollment came close to 10,000 acres, with almost 100 new properties open to Minnesota's hunters. However, because of federal cutbacks to the Farm Bill, Minnesota will be losing about $1 million that would have further funded walk-in access through 2013. It is unclear just what funding might be available at the state level to continue the walk-in program. Also, 3 new bills were introduced during the 2011 legislative session that could tremendously impact the future of fish, game, and wildlife. The first bill is House File 332 for no net gain of lands open to public hunting, that was introduced by State Representative Steve Drazkowski from Mazeppa. This bill would prevent future purchases of public lands open to hunting unless first existing public lands of the same amount were first sold. Currently, 17 representatives have signed on to this bill. Another bill, House File 1073, introduced by State Representative Rick Hansen from South St. Paul, would eliminate citizen councils that currently make recommendations to the legislature on habitat and waters funding. Under this bill, the Lessard-Sams Council, LCCMR Citizen Lottery Council, and the Clean Water Citizens Council would be abolished. These councils would be replaced by a super commission of legislators only that would choose projects and recommend allocations of $260 million each year. 9 representatives have authored this bill. And lastly, a bill to repeal the Constitutional Legacy Amendment was introduced by Representative Mark Biskins from Jordan. This bill would create an amendment to go on the ballot in the fall election of 2012 and would allow citizens to remove the Legacy Amendment that voters passed back in 2008 with almost a 60% majority. This would remove the current legacy sales tax and take away about $250 million a year currently going to clean water, game, fish, and wildlife, parks and trails, and arts and culture. At this time, 5 representatives have signed on to the bill. These topics will be further explained during today's show. Minnesota Outdoor Heritage Alliance is proud to be a sponsor of Conservation Sportsman News. Our mission is to protect and guarantee the right to pursue the time-honored traditions of hunting and fishing and related activities for every Minnesota citizen in perpetuity through legislative action, public awareness, and education. MOHA is proud to have successfully promoted and passed 2 constitutional amendments, the Right to Hunt and Fish and also the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment that guarantees funding over the next 25 years for our fish, game, wildlife, and habitat resources. Welcome to our agency partners section, and joining me today are Mary Beth Block from the DNR and also Bruce Pedersen, a hunter from Hutchinson, Minnesota. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Mary Beth, you're the coordinator of the new walk-in access program. Would you please describe what walk-in is about and also what your duties are with the program?
Well, Kevin, I work for the section of wildlife of DNR, and the walk-in access program is a partnership of local soil and water conservation districts, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and the DNR. And my job is to coordinate all those parties to get this program launched and running. And largely the DNR looks to connect the hunters to these local properties that they can, private land that they can hunt.
And Mary Beth, were the landowners receptive to the program? How many acres were enrolled? How many properties?
Well, we are pretty excited about the start. As you know, this program's been talked about whether or not it would work in Minnesota for about 20 years. But the first enrollment, we almost made our 10,000 acre goal. We enrolled over 9,000 acres and about 100 fields in southwest Minnesota open to hunting.
And then what is the compensation per landowner per acre? How did that go?
Well, we really targeted these parcels to lands that are already enrolled in a conservation program, so they are getting some payment from that program like CRP. And this program pays them $10 base payment to open their lands to the public to hunt. They get an additional $1 if it's over 160 acres, an additional $1 if it's within another half mile of another public hunting area, and an additional $1 if they signed up for 2 or more years.
Okay.
So $10 to $13 range.
And then Bruce, your experience as a hunter, tell us about hunting walk-ins in Minnesota and what you hunt for, and then other places that you've done walk-in hunting.
Well, I grew up in western Minnesota, Wheaton, Minnesota, in the Red River Valley, and when I grew up in the 50s and 60s, pheasant hunting was phenomenal. Of course, after the 60s it declined, but I continued to hunt, and I found out over the years that South Dakota is the place to go because of the habitat and the access to lands, and western Minnesota has got good areas too, but South Dakota with their walk-in areas just gives you probably 2 to 3 times more land to hunt in, and I hunt pheasants and small game, and it's just a joy to go out and hunt when you've got access to the different lands.
And how did Minnesota's program, the lands that you went on, the walk-in access program, compare with the Dakotas?
Well, I've not seen a lot of Minnesota's walk-in areas. I have probably seen 5 or 6. The habitat looked very excellent, the ones I have seen basically in the western part of the state. South Dakota's has always been good, but they have mowed a lot of the areas out there, whereas the ones in Minnesota looked excellent. I mean, really nice cover. So.
And from what you saw, was there anything about the program that you would like improved or additions, or what would you like to see?
Well, I think we could always have more land. I think I'd like to see more properties signed up. You know, this is just new, so that will happen. I'd also like to see an expansion of counties. I'd like to see some additional counties on the eastern edge added to the walk-in areas like McLeod, Meeker County, some of those, because those are also good pheasant habitat or wildlife habitat counties in addition to what is in place already.
Okay. Now, we also have a excerpt from one of the atlas that was available. It's actually a map that shows the different areas. And on this, in the areas that were covered in this walk-in program, basically how many counties was it, Mary Beth? What part of the state did you focus in, and why was that?
Well, we focused in the southwestern part of the state for this first go-round. This was funded by a grant from the federal government. And the 21 counties really are quality pheasant habitat. We knew that we had a lot of opportunity in terms of the enrollment in conservation programs. And we needed to keep it at a geographic scope where we could really assess how it was going and evaluate and make adaptive changes. That's what a pilot program is all about.
Now, the map that the public is seeing right now on the screen, it comes from this atlas. Would you just show us the atlas?
Right. This is our first walk-in atlas, and the right inside cover shows the map, so an overview of where all the hunting areas are. And then, similar to North Dakota and South Dakota, you get to individual tiles that have more detail by county of walk-in access land and other hunting, public hunting areas, public land.
And now we have actually some footage showing the lands themselves, some DNR footage that we received on hunters out in the areas. Here we have a hunter who is actually walking in some nice areas. We have a dog that is happy frolicking around. We see some prairies and wetlands, and it really shows some excellent habitat cover for pheasant hunting and other types of hunting. And what I like too is that there's different types of grasses. For instance, here is excellent nesting grass that's part of a walk-in program. So it really shows some excellent cover there, and I'm sure Bruce, you'll agree it's pretty good cover there. Why is having a walk-in program important to you? I mean, after all, we do have WMAs, wildlife management areas, waterfowl production areas. Why should the state invest money in a walk-in program? What are the pluses that you see?
Well, as the population has grown over the years, we've got that many more hunters, although it may be down a little bit this year, but more and more pressure on public hunting land. And by having more walk-in acres or more acreage to hunt on, it just gives the hunters greater access to those lands. So those areas, a lot of those areas really get tromped on big time during the hunting season. And by having more acres, more access, it just gives you more chance to hunt, more lands to walk on. So.
Now, Mary Beth, many of the programs, well, any program really with state government depends on money and keeping it going. My understanding is that for the walk-in program, basically it's about $500,000 to keep 25,000 acres going. It narrows down to about $20 per acre. If you figure your $10 to $13 to compensate the farmer, and then you have the signage, printing of the atlases, marketing, working with the different counties and their soil and water districts. But basically, it's about a $20 an acre program. We're going to see some information now here on the screen. We see a walk-in program, 250 properties, 100 acres average, 25,000 acres, boiling down to about $20 per acre. Now, if we compare that to a purchase or purchasing of one property, let's say 160 acres, that would be 160 acres total at approximately $3,000 an acre. Now, we know land values in Minnesota have gone up tremendously. In many counties, it's up to $5,000 and $7,000, but typically these are marginal lands, so we chose kind of as $3,000 as kind of a rough figure on that. But there again, $500,000 is $500,000. What do you see, Mary Beth, with the funding going forward? I understand that this year was funded, and would you tell us about funding for next year and the years to follow? Where do we stand right now in that regards?
Well, in 2009, we received a grant from the federal government, a new program, Voluntary Public Access, and that was to fund a 3-year pilot program. And so we are funded for this upcoming hunting season. We're going to start signing up landowners in February of 2012. The properties will open September of 2012 and close after spring turkey 2013. The bad news is the federal government, the 2012 appropriation that was just passed, zeroed out the Voluntary Public Access Program. So we don't have that 3rd year for the 2013-14 hunting season, which has caused us to start a conversation with the constituents that support this program to see if we can find some permanent funding sources.
Now, Bruce, other states fund it with, or actually have some partial funding regarding a stamp. There's been some talk about a $10 stamp or more. Would you as a hunter pay an extra fee to go in and hunt on these areas? What's your feeling?
I absolutely would, and I believe I can speak for most hunters, they absolutely would too. I'd pay in a form of a stamp, increased license, whatever. If I had more access to lands, I would have no problem doing it. I'd be more than happy to do it. And I believe most other pheasant hunters would too, or hunters. Yep.
We have some last parting footage here, some pictures taken of people using our walk-in lands. The first one shows a son and a father out in a walk-in area. You see the lush cover there, obviously probably hunting pheasants. The next picture shows also a wetland in the area. It also handles not only pheasant hunting, but duck hunting and other types of hunting. And then, of course, the last spot, which is what it's all about. A happy father and his children out with birds and a dog. They've had a great time. We want to thank you both for joining us today, and we hope sincerely this program will continue.
Thank you, Kevin.
And thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. McLeod County chapter of Pheasants Forever leads the way in conservation for you, your children, and Minnesota's wildlife. Over the years, this chapter has purchased 2,500 acres for wildlife management areas open to public hunting. We formed in 1988 and have the honor of becoming the first Pheasants Forever chapter to reach $4 million in habitat work. All this gets done through volunteers and contributors working as a team to accomplish great things for youth, wildlife, and public access to hunting. This is our legislative topics section, and joining me today are Gary Leaf with Sportsman for Change, Mark Johnson with the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, and Brad Nyland with the Minnesota Waterfowl Association. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
This part of our show actually deals with what's happening at the Capitol. There were 3 bills that we're going to discuss in this next few minutes, and the first is going to be no net gain. House File 332, introduced by Representative Steve Jaskowski from Mazeppa. Basically, no net gain says that we would no longer be able to purchase future public lands that would be open to public hunting unless other public lands were first sold. Mark, why don't you share with me what difficulty that would cause in having habitat projects, purchasing lands? What is that going to cause logistically? What problems?
Well, there's number one problem in the property that would be sold then to compensate for one purchased. Often those properties are purchased with dollars that are dedicated. In other words, dollars that are meant for that purchase. So if you're going to be selling that property, you're somewhat going against the original purpose and original intent of the purchase itself and the use of the funds. That's one thing. Another thing is that what lands are going to be sold. If you're in an area that has a plethora, is just swamped in public lands, then you really don't feel like you need much more because you've got a lot of access. But there's a lot of sections of the state where we just don't have much for public lands. And that's where the rub comes from. You know, who's going to get, who's going to take. This bill, I just don't like it. I think it really stinks.
Gary, dealing with the legacy amendment that was passed in 2008, almost 60% of the voters. I believe most voters probably thought there was going to be some purchases of lands. How do you feel about the legacy amendment and having a bill like this, if it were to be passed, this no net gain?
Well, first off, you know, Minnesota is one of 3 states now that have dedicated funding for natural resources. Missouri's the most known of the 3. So indeed, this is what I would call constitutional conservation. In particular, over the last decade, what's been contained within the constitutional language is a specific provision about acquisition, which is if there is land acquired, you know, it's done for the purpose that it's open to the public for the taking of fish and game. So this has been out there for a long time, that a primary purpose, at least of the Outdoor Heritage Fund that's overseen by the Lessard Council, that some of that money would be used to really buy lands that would be open for the public. That's the primary issue. So the next generation of people that are interested in these things, hunters, anglers, conservationists, wildlife watchers, and so on, would have a place to go if they can't afford their own private lands.
So in essence, if this bill were passed, you'd really be going against the grain of the voters in Minnesota. They expected lands to be purchased.
Certainly wouldn't be, you'd be certainly in the intent of what that language was about, and the effort to place it on the ballot over the last decade certainly go against that. And also the mission of the bulk of conservation groups in the United States is to deal with public land. So a lot of the hunting and angling conservation groups, that's what they do. That's their whole mission. And it would definitely be against what thousands of volunteers that worked on it and people that worked on it. It would be a major setback in terms of the fund and the Constitution.
Brad Nyland, your members with the Minnesota Waterfowl Association, say you had to go back to your board if this bill were passed and say, you know what, we can't buy new lands for waterfowl production areas or wildlife management areas unless somewhere in the state we sell an equal amount of lands. How would that go with your board and chapters? How would that pass or go out in your areas?
Certainly wouldn't go over very well. I think, as Gary mentioned, there's so many people work long and hard to accomplish what we're accomplishing, and there's so much more work to be done. I think it's ridiculous, frankly, to go down that road, and I think we've got to kind of keep our eye on the ball and keep moving forward.
And then the last thing, Mark Johnson. Many legislators say, hey, we sell land, we purchase land, we take land off the tax roll. Mm-hmm. Why don't you tell us what really happens once land is purchased for WMA, what happens with landowners, what happens with the county and taxes?
Sure. When the state comes into ownership of property, there's what's called payment in lieu of taxes that's an owing by the state to the county. In other words, there's not going to be property tax received from the private landowner because it's public landowner now. So the state compensates the county for that. And of course the township and so on. The money does go from the state to those local entities. And usually it's more than the amount of the normal property taxes for that property. The other thing is, even if the federal government takes possession of it, the federal government pays that also. It's called PILT, or payment in lieu of tax.
Okay. And I believe the auditor came out with a report that said many times this PILT payment, once a land is purchased and goes into the public lands, it often exceeds what the regular tax base would be. So
that's right. At times it'll be 30% more than the regular tax base.
We also, now if we'll go on to a next piece of legislation, and this is introduced by Representative Rick Hansen of South St. Paul. And in this bill, House File 1073, it would eliminate the Lessard-Sams Council. It would eliminate the LCCMR Lottery Council. And thirdly, it would eliminate the Clean Water Council. Recommendations made by citizens in a council format to the legislature on projects. Gary, why don't you share with us what you think of that idea, and in turn creating a super council of just legislators to decide where the money goes?
Well, I think the governance systems that have been that were carried with these different bills over the last decade, certain states like Missouri, which has a citizens panel that oversees all their natural resource investments, that was established in the 30s and so on. Before this ever went out to the ballot, the legacy amendment, the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council was established because, frankly, a lot of the sportsmen and conservationists around the state did not trust at that time that if it passed, that the politicians would spend the money on conservation, would start going to other things and be diverted. And so that's why it was established. This would be a major setback for those who really do want accountability, who really do want transparency, and who want a process that's open and competitive, which the Lessard Council is, and gets all types of projects from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to the varying groups here, and Ducks Unlimited and the Nature Conservancy and Trust for Public Land. All these different groups come in with their competitive projects, and we think a partnership between the citizens, or a citizen-led council, 8 citizens and 4 legislators, and the legislative auditor gave it a very strong review and believed it has a very strong impact.
Mark Johnson, there's been some criticism by legislators that because people who sit on the council have sometimes connections with past nonprofits, maybe they have sat on a past board or been involved with a chapter, that for some reason that doesn't jive and shouldn't be. Would you share with us what you think is the merit of having someone who's been involved at the chapter level or been involved in an organization serving on the council and looking at these projects? What's your take on that?
Sure, it's considered conflict of interest is the controversy here. And to what degree is conflict of interest going to be have a negative impact upon how those dollars are spent, or on the decisions that are made. If you want to get rid of all conflict of interest, you have to bring in people who know nothing about it, don't care, and don't have nothing to worry about. Oppose that to people who care about the issue, who care about our natural resources, and who are willing to serve. That's the two sides that you have. If you bring in people who have passion for the resource, they're going to look out for the passion. They also have an educational background, or at least a knowledge base to draw from. And when you're going into, especially the council, the Lessard-Sams Council, for example, they deal with a huge amount of information and some phenomenal projects that are multi-million-dollar projects. You don't want somebody who has no passion, who has no interest trying to make those decisions. You've got to have people in there who are willing to serve. And believe me, I know many of the council members. It is totally a labor of love for those people. It's not that they're seeking power. This is really a labor of love.
And I may also add that these council members are not active employees of any of these groups. These are volunteers spending their own time to drive down to the Twin Cities or wherever the meetings are.
Absolutely.
A lot of time and expense out of their own pocket on that. And then last thing, Brad, dealing with the council, and you've had different projects. Do you feel overall it's a good process to have the council, to have them evaluate projects? What's your experience with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, as Mark mentioned, by having the passion, and I think Gary said this with the transparency. I think that's with our membership and just with hunters in general, I think that's the overall flavor by not having legislators only, by having an active council, that it provides that transparency that's needed. Certainly within our organization, that's something that we hear time and time again.
The last bill is House File 1723, introduced by Representative Biskins, Mark Biskins from Jordan. And this is something that came out of kind of left field the last week, I believe, of the session. The elimination of the legacy funds, basically a repeal, a bill that would put it back on the ballot for the people to vote. Basically say, was it a good idea? Basically in an effort to repeal the legacy amendment. If we look at this, there'll be a graphic here shortly about the pie chart that shows how those funds are distributed. And one thing we'll see here in the red part of the pie chart, Fish, Game, and Wildlife, which is where the Lessard Sam's Council covers 33%, so a third of the funds. Clean Water, a third. Trails and Parks, a little over 14%, and about 19, just about 20% for arts and culture. Gary, what do you think about repealing the Legacy Amendment, and what do you think's behind, why would a legislator want to repeal something that almost 60% of the voters voted on in 2008?
Well, I just wanted to address something on the conflict of interest issue too, which kind of gets to this issue that currently in the Senate and the House, we have farmers that sit on ag committees, we have lawyers that sit on judiciary, we have teachers that sit on education. That's really an issue that's not a non-issue because you have to have people with the expertise. That's common sense. Now the repealer, there's no bill probably in the state's history where everybody agrees with it, and so is this. Even though this passed by the largest voter margin of any initiative, any vote period in the state's history, there's still people that disagree with it, and some of them strongly disagree with it. This would be a real stretch as far as disagreement goes, because legislators really, are supposed to uphold the Constitution. At least that's what they're supposed to do. In this case, I think the voters have spoken on it. I think it's a settled issue. I think it's not in reality.
Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming and joining us with us this morning and sharing your views and your organization's views on these different bills. And there again, I guess it's up to us, our organizations and the hunters and anglers and conservationists of Minnesota, when bills like this come up, to voice our opinion. And of course, we do hope that those will come to our website, conservationsportsman.org, and they can contact their legislator versus a link to the legislature website. So thank you so much for coming today, and good hunting and good fishing, and thank you.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure.
Mauer Chevrolet presents the Minnesota Sportsman Show, January 12th through the 15th at St. Paul's River Center. See all the newest in fishing boats, pontoons, docks, RVs, and campers, as well as hunting and fishing gear and electronics. Hundreds of resorts and lodges. Plan your vacation right at the show. Fun events for the entire family. Live wild animals. Great hunting and fishing seminars. It's Minnesota's largest, the Sportsman Show, January 12th through the 15th at St. Paul's River Center.
And now it's up to you. By going to our website, conservationsportsman.org, you can learn more about the topics and bills we discussed today. You can see which legislators have signed on to these bills, and you can send an email to your own legislator about how you feel about these matters. Thank you for joining us today, and please pass our website on to your friends, where they can see a YouTube version of today's show. And thank you again for watching Conservation Sportsman News.